now move to the motion before the House this evening. The motion is, this House believes religious freedom supersedes civil rights. I now look to Vivien Hasan, Secretary's Committee, Trinity College, to open the case for the proposition.
Ladies and gentlemen, the motion before the House today is about forming a hierarchy of our rights. Most of us in this chamber, and I'm sure our esteemed speakers, would agree that all civil rights are of paramount importance in our society. But there is a fundamental problem here. Religious rights are themselves a civil liberty under the name of religious freedom. But this right has time and time again clashed with the right of citizens to social freedom and equality. There has been no frank discussion about what should happen when we run into conflict between different but deeply rooted rights, like we do in what is now being called the case of the gay cake. Legislation has so far avoided spelling out what should happen in a conflict between one civil liberty and another. How are competing interests to be balanced in the clashes of rights? Parliament has left it to the courts, and the court results have been messy. It is time for us to have that difficult conversation. But before I begin, allow me to introduce the speakers of our opposition tonight. After me will be Will Barnes, Treasurer, third-year PPE student at Harvard College. Contrary to his charm and boyish good looks, I've heard Will is quite a wild spirit. Or maybe not, because in the words of his little brother, he's never done anything embarrassing or funny. From his best friend at Hartford, and I quote, "He's so on top of things, it's hard to find embarrassing stories." A reach out to the president-elect and Will's former schoolmate and co-debating captain, the formidable Michael Lee, yielded no reply. You might even say that my inability to find dirt on Will, despite knowing many of his best friends, is somewhat fishy. On top of things, though, is an understatement about Will. The most stress I've ever seen him is when he was making sure that his bow tie was done right, and trust me, things have been more hectic around here. We're very lucky to have such an unflappable and competent treasurer at the union, and I look forward to hearing him speak. After him will be Miss Mary Honeyball, a member of the European Parliament who has been outspoken about the intersection of religion and politics. Mrs. Honeyball once stated that Catholicism exercises a vice-like grip on the legislative process in Europe, and I'm sure she will have much to say of interest. She is also an alumni of our very own Somerville College. Finally, on the opposition, Miss Nia Griffith, the Shadow Secretary of State for Defence. Mrs. Griffith has spoken conspicuously about the problematic interplay of the political and religious spheres, both in Parliament and in other contexts. Mr. President, these are your speakers, and they are most welcome. Three years ago, a man walks into a bakery in Belfast and orders a custom-made cake. He wants it to feature two of the world's biggest celebrities. One is called Bert and one is called Ernie from the TV show Sesame Street. And the slogan, support gay marriage. Unfortunately, he runs into problems when the evangelical Christian owners of the bakery come out to apologize. "I'm so sorry," they said. "We cannot in good conscience make the cake because we believe that same-sex marriage goes against the teachings of the Bible." In a decision upheld by the Court of Appeal, a judge has found that the Asher's Bakery's actions were illegal, a violation of the customer's civil right to protection from discrimination based on their sexual orientation. But the owners of the Asher's Bakery are arguing that this constitutes a breach of their religious freedom and forces them to betray their deepest beliefs. Yes, civil liberties are very important, and in cases where they do not infringe upon deeply rooted religious beliefs, values, and freedoms, they must be staunchly defended. However, all liberties have their constraints, and we impose the constraint when a more important right is being traded off. And I believe that faith is something that lies at the deepest core of human nature. This conflict is an arena where, with all due respect to the opposition, few politicians have dared to tread. Perhaps this is in the knowledge that suggesting one civil right could be less worthy than another will instantly invite anger and acrimony. Perhaps it is for fear that they will be shouted down by accusations of furious cries and equality for all. No one wants to be the person who pushed Rosa Parks off the bus. Perhaps some of you here tonight feel that very instinct in you right now. Yes, I believe that equality is fundamental. But I stand before you tonight, ladies and gentlemen, to argue that protecting the right to practice our faith where this is not an obstruction, is an important part of the deeper struggle to create a society in which an individual's moral code cannot be forcibly violated by the state. Let us first be clear on what we mean by religious freedom. Religious freedom is built from a collection of more basic principles: freedom of thought, freedom of speech, freedom of expression, and freedom of assembly, wrapped into a shape that is specific to faith. In olden times, when persecution was more common, religious freedom also meant freedom from torture, the right to security, and the right to equal treatment under the law. Thankfully, these last few have lost their relevance in Britain today, but in many parts of the world, the suppression of religious rights continues to correspond with violent threat to every other human right. Even now, in places like France, aggressive policies towards Muslim and Jews have continued, and there is a prevent agenda that seeks to monitor Muslim students. And the question to ask yourself here is not, who has to be the victim when we uphold our when we uphold our civil liberties, but instead, what way can we find to bring harmony between our different rights? The Ashes Bakery is not a case where exempting people on religious grounds directly limited the options of their customer. There was not just one bakery in Belfast. There were 101 other bakeries, any of which could have made the Burton Ernie case. Civil liberties can clearly be protected by alternative means, particularly when their liberty is tied with goods and services that are generic and easily provided. By contrast, the right to afterlife, one of the most fundamental religious beliefs that many people hold, is not one that you can easily gain. In cases like these, the owner's right to religious freedom, to live without violating their conscience and betraying their beliefs, should have allowed them to pass their customer on to another store, which would not have caused as much difficulty as the court case has. There is a better solution, a solution with compromise and mutual respect. I want to talk about an example where recognizing religious rights as an exception has borne tremendous fruits. In 2015, the state of Utah passed an anti-discrimination bill which was stunning for one reason. It was hailed as a breakthrough in balancing civil rights by both Mormon leaders and gay rights advocates. It protected LGBTQ+ people from discrimination in housing and employment, but it would also protect employees from being fired for talking about religious or moral belief, as long as the speech was not harassing or disruptive. The bill has come to be known as the Utah Compromise. It saw the extraordinary moment when two leading apostles went to a news conference on Capitol Hill to endorse a bill protecting LGBTQ+ rights, even though their church is opposed to same-sex marriage. Gay rights advocates say that it was the support of the blessing of these apostles which turned the tide in the legislature, where most members are Mormon, and allowed the bill to pass. It was the first time a Republican-controlled legislature with a Republican governor has led to the extension of protections from LGBT+ people. Clearly, the solution is compromise, and that means respecting the exceptions of religious right in order to move forwards. This is not about letting religion get away with it. All too often, there is perception of sincere religious believers as being motivated by hatred instead of faith. But here, we are giving our people the right to decline from doing something wrong. Remember that the stakes are incredibly high. America's Affordable Care Act of 2010 requires that employers provide preventative care for women, and some of these might have the effect of preventing an already fertilized egg from developing any further by inhibiting attachment to the uterus. For some Christians, this is tantamount to murder. That's not to say that there is no right to women's bodies in America, because how the Act has worked is that employers are instead required to provide insurance which will give the cover, rather than having to give it themselves. But this case is an example of where we have recognized that religious observers have a right to a different treatment than those who do not, based on their faiths. Imagine yourself as someone who is forced to betray the strongest intuitions of your conscience. No society that claims to be free and fair can force its citizens to do such a thing. Exceptions within the rule of law are and should be made in the name of religion. If you listen to yourself and know that you believe in harmony, progress, freedom, and above all in acceptance, then I cannot be any prouder or more determined when I say that this motion must and will stand. Thank you.